The impossible challenge, the fall of giants. The wreckage of the Kelmorian war fleet drifted silently through the void of space. 3,000 ships, each one a masterpiece of advanced engineering, now reduced to twisted metal and shattered dreams. Commander Thelos of the Kelmorian High Command floated in his escape pod, watching the last of his civilization's hope burn away in the darkness. His 4 eyes, usually bright with the violet glow of his species, had dimmed to almost nothing. Behind him, the Vorith Empire's fleet hung in perfect formation, their ships gleaming like polished obsidian against the stars. The Vorith had not lost a single vessel. Not one. Their shields had absorbed everything the Kelmorians threw at them. Plasma cannons that could melt asteroids, quantum torpedoes that could phase through solid matter, graviton beams that could crush a moon into dust. Nothing worked. Nothing even scratched the surface of those impossible shields. The Vorith defense system adapted to every attack within seconds, learning and evolving faster than any weapon could be modified. It was not just technology anymore. It was like fighting against the laws of physics themselves. A galaxy in despair. News of the Kelmorian defeat spread across the galaxy like a plague. In the great halls of 1,000 worlds, leaders gathered to discuss the inevitable. The Vorith Empire had been expanding for 400 years and no one had ever stopped them. 68 civilizations had tried to fight. 68 civilizations had failed. Some had surrendered immediately after witnessing the Vorith power. Others had resisted and paid the ultimate price. Their worlds now served the Empire, their people either enslaved or extinct. On the diplomatic station known as Nexus Prime, representatives from over 200 species assembled for an emergency summit. The chamber was enormous, built to accommodate beings of all shapes and sizes. There were creatures made of crystal who communicated through light. There were gas-based entities held together by electromagnetic fields. There were ancient reptilian species who remembered the galaxy before the Vorith came. And there, in a modest section reserved for newer members, sat the human delegation. The human observer Captain Marcus Webb sat quietly in his chair, observing the chaos around him. He was a tall man with weathered features and gray streaks running through his dark hair. His uniform bore the insignia of the Earth Defense Initiative, a relatively new organization formed after humanity discovered they were not alone in the universe. Webb had spent 30 years in the military, but nothing in his training had prepared him for this moment. He was watching an entire galaxy give up. The speaker at the center of the chamber was Chancellor Vorin, a dignified being from the Archeon Collective. His species had been spacefaring for over 20,000 years. They had witnessed the rise and fall of empires beyond counting. When Vorin spoke, his words carried the weight of ages. My friends, colleagues, fellow survivors, we must face the truth we have been avoiding. The Vorith cannot be defeated. Their shield technology is beyond our comprehension. Every weapon we possess, every tactic we employ becomes useless the moment they experience it. We have lost 68 civilizations trying to fight. How many more must fall before we accept reality? The voice of defiance, the chamber murmured in agreement, a sound like wind through dead trees. Then cutting through the resignation, came a voice none of them expected. With respect, Chancellor, I disagree. Every being in the chamber turned to look at the human section. Marcus Webb stood, his expression calm but his eyes burning with determination. Chancellor Vorin's expression showed surprise. Captain Webb of Earth, you wish to speak? Webb walked to the speaker's platform, his boots echoing in the sudden silence. I have been listening to this council for 3 hours now. I have heard detailed accounts of every failed battle against the Vorith. I have studied the tactical reports, analyzed the weapon systems used, and reviewed the shield adaptation patterns. And I have come to a conclusion that differs from yours. A being that resembled a floating jellyfish pulsed with bioluminescent colors, its translator converting the patterns to words. Young species, you have been in space for barely 50 years. What could you possibly understand that we do not? Webb nodded respectfully. You are right. We are new to this. We do not have your advanced technology or your centuries of knowledge, but we do have something you seem to have lost. We have the ability to think differently. The proposal Chancellor Vorin leaned forward with interest. Explain yourself, Captain. Webb activated a holographic display that showed the Vorith shield system in action. Every weapon system used against the Vorith has one thing in common. They are all based on established galactic science, refined over millennia, perfected through countless generations of research. The Vorith shields adapt because they understand the principles behind these weapons. They know how energy weapons work because they follow predictable physics. They know how kinetic weapons function because mass and velocity are constants. They can defend against anything they can comprehend. A reptilian delegate named Sarix hissed in frustration. Are you suggesting we abandon science itself? Physics is not negotiable, human. The laws of the universe do not bend to wishful thinking. Webb smiled, and it was not a friendly expression. No, but they can be interpreted differently. You see, humanity came late to the galactic community. We developed science in isolation, without guidance from older species. That meant we made a lot of mistakes. We pursued theories that led nowhere. We built weapons based on principles that your civilizations abandoned thousands of years ago because they were inefficient or impractical. He pulled up a series of images showing Earth's history of warfare, primitive gunpowder weapons, early nuclear devices, experimental particle accelerators, chemical warfare, biological agents. We tried everything. And yes, most of it was crude compared to galactic standards. But here is the interesting part. Some of our abandoned theories, some of our failed experiments were never actually proven impossible. They were just harder to implement than the alternatives. We gave up on them because better options existed. But what if better is not what we need? What if we need different? Project Prometheus. The chamber was silent now. Every being focused on the human captain. Webb continued, his voice growing stronger. I propose Project Prometheus. 10 separate weapons programs, each based on a different, unconventional principle. Some will use Earth's outdated theories. Some will combine galactic science with human unpredictability. And some will be built on ideas so strange that no rational civilization would ever consider them. The Vorith shields adapt to weapons they understand. Let us hit them with weapons that should not exist. Chancellor Vorin studied Webb carefully. This is an enormous gamble, Captain. If your weapons fail, the Vorith will turn their attention to Earth. Your species will be judged as hostile and eliminated. Are you prepared to risk extinction on this plan? Webb met his gaze without flinching. Chancellor, with respect, we are already at risk of extinction. The Vorith will reach human space within 2 years, whether we fight or not. The only question is whether we die on our knees or on our feet. I would rather die trying something insane than live knowing we never tried at all. A long silence followed. Finally, Commander Thalos, who had been quiet throughout the session, spoke. I lost everything to the Vorith. My fleet, my world, my people. If there is even the smallest chance that the humans can succeed where we failed, I will support them. Other voices joined in agreement. Not all of them, but enough. Chancellor Vorin raised his hand for silence. Very well, Captain Webb. The Council will grant you 2 years. Build your impossible weapons. But understand this. If you fail, if Earth falls, the rest of us will have no choice but to surrender. We cannot let more worlds burn for false hope. The race begins 3 weeks later. Marcus Webb stood in the primary construction bay of Luna Station 7, watching as thousands of workers swarmed over 10 massive project sites. Each site was dedicated to one weapon system, and each was more bizarre than the last. Project 1 was developing something called a gravitational disruption cannon, based on theories about space-time manipulation that most galactic scientists considered mathematical curiosities rather than practical applications. Project 2 focused on what humans called dumbfire weapons, massive kinetic projectiles with no guidance systems or energy signatures that the Vorith shields might recognize. Project 3 was attempting to create a weapon that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, allowing it to bypass conventional defenses by attacking from angles that should not exist in normal space. Project 4 involved exotic matter and negative energy states. Project 5 was developing biological weapons that could evolve faster than the Vorith shields could adapt. Project 6 used quantum entanglement in ways that violated several supposedly fundamental principles. The remaining 4 projects were even stranger. Project 7 was working on something the lead scientist called weaponized probability. Project 8 involved temporal displacement. Project 9 attempted to create what amounted to a controlled singularity. And Project 10, the most controversial of all, was based entirely on random chaos theory, building a weapon that even its creators did not fully understand. The skeptics and believers. Dr. Elizabeth Rourke, the chief scientist overseeing all 10 projects, approached Webb as he watched the construction. She was a thin woman with sharp features and eyes that seemed to see through problems to their solutions. Half the teams think what we are doing is brilliant, she said without preamble. The other half think we are completely insane. Webb smiled. And what do you think, Doctor? She was quiet for a moment, watching the sparks fly from welding torches across the bay. I think we are both. These weapons violate so many established principles that most galactic scientists refuse to even review our designs. But the mathematics work, Captain. They should not, but they do. It is like the universe has loopholes that no one bothered to explore because they seemed pointless. Webb nodded. The Vorith became unbeatable because they perfected defense against known weapons. We are not building known weapons. We are building impossible ones. The clock ticks down across human space. The 2-year countdown had begun. Every colony, every station, every ship contributed to Project Prometheus. Resources that should have been used for expansion went to weapon development. Scientists who should have been researching medicine or agriculture were instead calculating the physics of weapons that should not work. And over it all hung the knowledge that the Vorith were coming. Intelligence reports tracked the Empire's movements as they consolidated their hold on former Kelmorian space. Soon they would turn their attention to the next target on their list, and Earth, with its defiant stance and its impossible weapons project, had just made itself the most attractive target in the galaxy. In the depths of space, far from human eyes, Vorith commanders reviewed the reports about Project Prometheus. They found the human efforts amusing. Let the primitives build their toys. The shield would adapt just as it always had. In 400 years, nothing had touched them. Nothing ever would. But they had never faced an enemy too stubborn to accept the impossible. They had never encountered a species that treated cannot be done as a personal challenge rather than a statement of fact. The Vorith shields were perfect against everything the galaxy had tried. They were about to discover that humanity had not tried everything yet. Not even close. The clock was ticking. The weapons were being built. And the galaxy held its breath, watching to see if hope was real or just another word for denial. The 10 Weapons of Hope. 18 Months of Madness. Construction bays of Luna Station 7 had transformed into something between a research facility and a fever dream. Dr. Elizabeth Rourke moved through the chaos with practiced efficiency, her datapad constantly updating with progress reports from all 10 weapon projects. Some days she felt like a conductor leading an orchestra, where half the musicians were playing instruments that had never existed before. Around her, scientists argued in a dozen languages. Engineers welded together components that theoretical physics said should explode on contact, and test results defied explanation on an hourly basis. Project 1 had achieved its first successful test 3 weeks ago. The gravitational disruption cannon had fired a beam that literally bent space around a target drone, crushing it from all directions simultaneously, without touching it directly. The weapon worked, but it consumed enough energy to power a small city for a month with each shot. The team was now working on reducing the power requirements to something actually deployable on a warship. Project 2 had taken a different approach entirely. Instead of exotic physics, they had built what amounted to a giant railgun that fired solid tungsten rods at relativistic speeds. There were no energy signatures, no complex systems for the Vorith shields to analyze and adapt to. Just raw kinetic force delivered by dumb metal moving fast enough to make physics do the work. Breakthroughs and setbacks. Project 3 had experienced both triumph and disaster in the same week. They successfully created a projectile that existed partially in 4 spatial dimensions, allowing it to bypass conventional 3-dimensional barriers. The test missile had passed through 6 meters of solid steel without leaving a mark, then exploded inside the target. Unfortunately, the dimensional stabilizer had failed on the second test, and the weapon had briefly opened what the scientists called a very small and completely safe tear in spacetime. The fact that they emphasized completely safe while evacuating an entire section of the station had not inspired confidence. Project 4's exotic matter experiments had yielded fascinating results. They had created matter with negative mass that fell upward instead of down and seemed to violate conservation of momentum. When shaped into a weapon, it could theoretically punch through shields by doing things that shields were not designed to stop, because shields assumed matter would behave normally. The problem was producing enough exotic matter to make a viable weapon. Current production rates would give them approximately enough ammunition for 3 shots. Dr. Sarah Okonkwo, lead scientist on Project 5, had taken a completely different approach. She had engineered a microscopic organism that could survive in space and reproduced at exponential rates when exposed to energy fields. The Vorith shields radiated energy constantly to maintain their protective barriers. Okonkwo's organisms would feed on that energy and multiply, potentially overwhelming the shield generators through sheer biological pressure. Galactic warfare had moved beyond biological weapons millennia ago, considering them crude and unpredictable. Which was exactly why they might work. The Quantum Gamble Project. 6 had given the entire scientific community headaches. Dr. James Chen had weaponized quantum entanglement in a way that violated every known interpretation of quantum mechanics. His weapon could link particles in the projectile with particles in the target, creating a connection that bypassed space entirely. When the projectile was damaged, the target experienced identical damage instantaneously, regardless of distance or intervening barriers. The problem was that the targeting system required knowing the exact quantum state of particles inside enemy ships, which should be impossible to measure without alerting them. Chen had solved this by not measuring anything. Instead, his weapon fired millions of entangled particles in a shotgun pattern, and simply assumed some would quantum tunnel into the target ship. Probability said it would work 1 time in a billion. Chen's test suggested it worked 1 time in 10. When asked to explain why, he had shrugged and said, "The universe is weird." I stopped asking why. Project 7 had become the dark horse of the entire operation. Dr. Marcus Webb, no relation to Captain Webb, was attempting to weaponize probability itself. His device did not fire projectiles or beams. Instead, it created fields of altered probability, where unlikely events became likely and likely events became impossible. The controversial projects in testing, a target drone exposed to the field had experienced 17 critical system failures simultaneously, each with less than a 0.001% chance of occurring naturally. The drone's weapons had misfired, its engines had stalled, its navigation had failed, and its self-destruct sequence had activated without authorization. All within 3 seconds. The Galactic scientific observers had declared the results impossible, then reviewed the data again and declared them even more impossible. Webb had smiled and said, "Probability does not care what you think is possible." Project 8's temporal displacement weapon had been shut down 4 times by safety inspectors. The concept was simple in theory: fire a projectile, then displace it backward in time by 3 seconds so it hit the target before it was fired. Causality said this was impossible. The test results said it worked anyway, although the temporal physicist on the team insisted on calling it retrocausal projection rather than time travel because time travel was impossible. The fact that the weapon literally shot things into the past while everyone agreed time travel could not happen had created philosophical arguments that derailed 3 separate planning meetings. Project 9 was building a controlled singularity generator, not a black hole the scientists were very careful to specify, but a region of space where gravity became so intense that it functioned like one for practical purposes. The weapon would create a microscopic point of extreme gravitational force in front of an enemy ship, then release it. Everything within a kilometer would be drawn toward that point and crushed. The challenge was keeping the singularity stable long enough to deploy it without having it collapse immediately or expand uncontrollably. Current success rate was 40%, which the team considered excellent given they were creating miniature, almost black holes in a laboratory. The Chaos Weapon. The Chaos Weapon. And then there was Project 10. Dr. Amanda Foster had built what she called the Entropy Accelerator, a weapon based entirely on chaos theory and random chance. The device emitted a field that amplified small fluctuations into large-scale disruptions. A tiny variation in shield frequency would suddenly spike into catastrophic oscillations. A minor power fluctuation would cascade into total system failure. The weapon did not attack directly. It simply made bad things more likely to happen and good things less likely. During tests, the Entropy Accelerator had been activated near a military-grade shield generator, running at perfect efficiency. Within 40 seconds, the shield had collapsed due to a series of cascading failures that should have been statistically impossible. When engineers examined the generator afterward, they found nothing wrong with it. It had simply been extremely unlucky. The Galactic observers who reviewed Project 10's data had declared it pseudoscience. Dr. Foster had replied, "Call it whatever you want. It works." She had then demonstrated by activating the device while the lead observer was leaving the room. The automated door had malfunctioned, trapping him briefly. His communicator had lost signal. The lights had flickered, and his coffee had spilled. Foster had smiled sweetly and said, "Sometimes the universe just has bad days." The Vorith advance, while humanity built its impossible weapons. The Vorith Empire prepared its assault. Intelligence reports showed the Vorith fleet gathering at the edge of human space. 60 warships, each one protected by shields that had never failed. The fleet was smaller than what they had used against other civilizations. A calculated insult suggesting humans were not worth a full assault force. Captain Marcus Webb reviewed the intelligence data in his command center, his expression grim. "They will reach the Terran defense line in 6 weeks. Are we ready?" Dr. Rourke pulled up status reports from all 10 projects. Projects 1, 2, 5, 7, and 10 are fully operational and loaded onto warships. Project 3 is operational, but we only have enough dimensional stabilizers for 12 shots before the system needs recalibration. Project 4 has enough exotic matter ammunition for exactly 3 firings. Project 6 works, but the targeting is unreliable. Project 8 works perfectly but makes everyone nervous because it involves shooting backwards through time. Project 9 works unless it doesn't, in which case it might accidentally eat the ship that fired it. Webb was silent for a moment. "So we have 10 weapons. 5 work reliably, 3 work conditionally, and 2 might kill us." Rourke nodded. "That is an accurate summary, yes." Webb smiled grimly. "The Vorith have shields that adapted to every weapon in the galaxy for 400 years. We have 10 weapons that should not exist, 3 of which might kill us if we use them. I think those are acceptable odds." The defense line. The Terran defense line was humanity's last stand. 30 warships arranged in defensive formation across the approach vector to Earth. Each ship carried at least one of the Project Prometheus weapons. Some carried multiples. The ships themselves were not impressive by galactic standards. Human technology was still primitive, the vessels cobbled together from reverse-engineered alien tech and Earth engineering. But what they lacked in sophistication, they made up for in determination. Captain Marcus Webb commanded from the TNS Defiance, a heavy cruiser that carried the gravitational disruption cannon from Project 1. Around him, his crew worked with quiet efficiency, checking systems and running final diagnostics. Across the fleet, similar scenes played out on 29 other ships. Engineers made last-minute adjustments. Gunners calibrated targeting systems. Scientists monitored the exotic weapons with mixture of pride and terror. And everyone wondered if this would be humanity's finest hour or its last mistake. First contact. The Vorith fleet emerged from hyperspace exactly on schedule. 60 ships materialized in perfect formation, their black hulls reflecting no light. For a long moment, the two fleets faced each other across the void. Then the Vorith transmitted a message. The translation came through cold and emotionless. "Human vessels, you have been designated for subjugation. Surrender your ships and prepare for occupation. Resistance will result in elimination." Webb activated the fleet-wide channel. "Vorith fleet, this is Captain Marcus Webb of the Terran Defense Force. Your offer is declined. Leave our space immediately or face consequences." The response came back almost immediately. "Probability of human victory 0.0001%. You cannot harm us. Our shields are absolute," Webb smiled. "You know what is funny about absolute statements? They only take one exception to prove them wrong. All ships, weapons free. Show them what impossible looks like." The battle begins. The Defiance fired first. The gravitational disruption cannon discharged with a sound like reality tearing. Space itself bent around the lead Vorith ship, crushing it from all directions simultaneously. The shields tried to adapt, cycling through defensive frequencies at incredible speed, but there was nothing to adapt to. The weapon was not firing energy or matter. It was manipulating the fundamental geometry of space-time. The Vorith ship crumpled like paper, its shields flickering desperately before failing completely. The ship broke apart, its pieces drifting in directions that defied normal physics. For the first time in 400 years, a Vorith ship had been destroyed. The enemy fleet hesitated, their perfect formation breaking as commanders processed what they had just witnessed. That hesitation cost them. Project 2 weapons opened fire from 6 different ships. Tungsten rods accelerated to 0.95 light speed crossed the distance in seconds. The Vorith shields activated, preparing to adapt to the incoming projectiles, but there was nothing to adapt to. No energy signature, no complex systems, just solid metal moving faster than the shields had been designed to handle. 3 rods missed. 4 struck their targets dead center, punching through shields that were still trying to figure out what they were defending against. Chaos unleashed. The Vorith fleet began evasive maneuvers, their ships moving with inhuman precision. But Project 7 was already active. Dr. Webb's probability weapon engaged, creating fields of altered chance across the battlefield. Suddenly, Vorith weapons misfired. Navigation systems experienced critical errors. Shield generators developed quantum fluctuations that should not exist. One ship's main reactor went into emergency shutdown due to a coincidence of 17 simultaneous minor malfunctions. The Vorith were experiencing bad luck on a scale that defied statistical possibility. Project 5 deployed next. Billions of microscopic organisms spread through space, invisible and hungry. They found the Vorith shield generators and began feeding on the energy output. The organisms multiplied exponentially, each generation adapting to the shield frequency faster than the shields could change. Within minutes, 3 Vorith ships reported shield efficiency dropping. Within 10 minutes, those shields failed completely, leaving the ships vulnerable. The conventional weapons from human allies in the battle opened fire, destroying the defenseless vessels. The Dimensional Attack Project 3 fired its dimensional weapons, 12 shots total across the fleet. The missiles phased into the 4th spatial dimension, passing through shields as if they did not exist because, in 4-dimensional space, the 3-dimensional barriers genuinely did not exist. 8 missiles found their targets, exploding inside Vorith ships that had no internal defenses. The ships died from within, their shields still active and reading perfect integrity even as their interiors burned. The Vorith fleet was in full retreat now, but Project 10 activated. The entropy accelerator created fields of pure chaos across their escape vectors. Ships that tried to engage hyperspace drives experienced catastrophic failures. Navigation computers crashed. Power systems fluctuated wildly. It was as if the universe itself had decided the Vorith were having a very bad day. One ship actually collided with another, when both navigation systems failed simultaneously, something that should have been impossible given their AI coordination. The final weapons Project 6's quantum entanglement weapon fired, linking particles with 3 Vorith ships. When the projectile struck debris fields and shattered, the linked ships experienced identical damage, their hulls rupturing in patterns that matched the broken missiles. The Vorith shields could not stop damage that was not traveling through space, but was instead appearing inside their hulls due to quantum connection. Project 8, the controversial temporal weapon, fired once. The projectile appeared inside a Vorith ship 3 seconds before it was actually fired, the causality violation creating a paradox that the ship's systems could not process. The vessel's computers crashed, trying to understand how they had been hit by a weapon that had not been fired yet. Project 6's quantum entanglement weapon fired, linking particles with 3 Vorith ships. When the projectile struck debris fields and shattered, the linked ships experienced identical damage, their hulls rupturing in patterns that matched the broken missiles. The Vorith shields could not stop damage that was not traveling through space, but was instead appearing inside their hulls due to quantum connection. Project 8, the controversial temporal weapon, fired once. The projectile appeared inside a Vorith ship 3 seconds before it was actually fired, the causality violation creating a paradox that the ship's systems could not process. The vessel's computers crashed, trying to understand how they had been hit by a weapon that had not been fired yet. Project 9 deployed its controlled singularity. The miniature gravitational anomaly appeared in front of 2 Vorith ships. For 5 seconds it worked perfectly, pulling both vessels toward crushing doom. Then the containment wavered and the singularity collapsed in a burst of Hawking radiation that damaged both the target ships and the human vessel that fired it. The weapon worked, but the project team had been right to call it dangerous. And Project 4, with its 3 shots of exotic matter, fired all 3 at the Vorith command ship. The negative mass projectiles behaved in ways that made normal physics weep. They fell upward, curved in directions that should not exist, and punched through the command ship's shields by simply refusing to interact with them properly. The vessel's shield generators burned out trying to adapt to matter that violated fundamental assumptions about how matter should behave. Victory and understanding. When the battle ended, 42 Vorith ships had been destroyed or crippled. 18 had escaped into hyperspace, fleeing for the first time in their 400-year history of conquest. The human fleet had lost 6 ships, a heavy price, but one they had been willing to pay. Captain Webb sat in his command chair, watching the wreckage drift through space, and felt the weight of what they had accomplished. Dr. Rourke's voice came through the comm channel. "Captain, we are receiving transmissions from across the galaxy. Everyone saw the battle. Everyone knows the Vorith can be beaten." The message to the Galaxy Web activated the long-range transmitter, knowing his words would be heard by 200 civilizations. "This is Captain Marcus Webb to all galactic civilizations. Today humanity proved something important. The Vorith shields were not unbreakable. They were only unbreakable if you played by their rules. We built 10 weapons that broke the rules. 5 worked perfectly. 3 worked conditionally. 2 were dangerous to use. But all 10 did something the Vorith had never experienced. They did the impossible." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "The galaxy said no gun could break them. You were wrong, not because we were smarter or more advanced. We won because we were too stubborn to accept that anything was truly impossible. We won because we tried things you had abandoned as impractical. We won because sometimes the crazy ideas work." Across the galaxy, civilizations that had given up hope began to reconsider. If humanity could build 10 weapons that worked, what could they build with 400 years of experience? What could the combined genius of 200 species create if they stopped accepting limitations? The new beginning. In the wreckage of the Vorith command ship, investigators found something interesting. The shield technology was not as mysterious as everyone thought. It was simply very good at adapting to predictable weapons. But the system had limits. It could not adapt to things it could not understand. It could not defend against attacks that violated its fundamental assumptions. It could not protect against the impossible, because it had been designed by beings who thought some things were impossible. The Vorith Empire did not surrender, but they did something they had not done in 400 years. They retreated. They needed time to analyze what had happened, to understand these new weapons, to adapt. But humanity was already working on 10 new projects, 10 more impossible weapons. And this time, they had help from across the galaxy. Project Prometheus became Project Phoenix, with scientists from 100 civilizations contributing ideas that were strange, impractical, and absolutely devastating when combined with human stubbornness. Humanity's gift Captain Webb stood on the observation deck of Luna Station 7, looking at Earth below. Dr. Rourke joined him, her expression tired but satisfied. "The Council wants to meet with you again. They want to thank humanity formally." Webb shook his head. "We did not save them yet. We won one battle. The Vorith are still out there." Rourke smiled. "Yes, but now the galaxy knows they can be beaten. Now everyone is building impossible weapons. You did not just win a battle, Captain. You changed how an entire galaxy thinks about war." Webb was quiet for a moment. "We did not discover anything special, you know. We just refused to give up." Rourke nodded. "Yes, and that was the most special thing of all." Across human space, engineers were already beginning work on the next generation of weapons. Across the galaxy, civilizations were dusting off abandoned theories and crazy ideas. And somewhere in the darkness, the Vorith Empire was learning a lesson they should have learned 400 years ago. There is no such thing as an unbeatable defense. There is only defense that has not met the right offense yet. Humanity had brought 10 types of offense, and they were just getting started. The galaxy had said no gun could break the Vorith. Humanity built 10 that did. And in doing so, they taught the universe something that had been forgotten in 400 years of fear. Hope is not about having better technology. Hope is about refusing to accept that better technology does not exist. Sometimes you win not by being stronger, but by being too stubborn to lose. That was humanity's gift to the galaxy. Not superior weapons, but superior stubbornness. And in a universe full of impossible challenges, stubbornness might be the most powerful weapon of all.